This week, the head of the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, testified in front of Congress, and I was shocked by his answers. I'm going to explain his current scandal and answer the question, did Merrick Garland commit a crime? Two committees in Congress passed measures to hold Merrick Garland in contempt. The next step is for Congress to vote. This whole controversy is about secret audio recordings that Merrick Garland refuses to turn over to Congress. Let's take a step back so that you understand the importance of this audio. Joe Biden is under impeachment inquiry by Congress. They are investigating potential crimes by the president. One of those crimes is that the president was illegally holding classified documents at his home and other locations when he was a senator and vice president. This is happening at the same time that the Department of Justice is also investigating Donald Trump for holding classified documents when he was president. Merrick Garland set up two special prosecutors, one for Joe Biden and one for Donald Trump. While the court case against Donald Trump has been progressing, the Department of Justice determined that they were not going to prosecute Joe Biden. Isn't that convenient? The special prosecutor investigating Joe Biden is named Robert Hur. Robert Hur describes Joe Biden in his final report as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Basically, he was saying that Joe Biden was not mentally fit to stand trial, even though there was evidence he broke the law. This has sparked a lot of controversy, because if Joe Biden is not mentally fit enough to stand trial, how is he mentally fit enough to run the country? In addition, the treatment of both cases shows that there is a two-tiered justice system. How is Donald Trump in court, and Joe Biden is being let off the hook without any consequences? Donald Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago was raided with armed FBI agents, while Joe Biden's home was searched with advance notice alongside Joe Biden's lawyers. To show how extreme the difference was, the search warrant for the armed raid on Mar-a-Lago contained authorization to use deadly force. Merrick Garland authorized these agents to assassinate President Trump if they felt it was necessary. Keep in mind, this is an alleged crime about paperwork. It's only about paperwork, and the investigation contained authorization to shoot and kill. Doesn't that seem a bit extreme? What is going on? Meanwhile, Robert Hur describes the search at Joe Biden's house as a planned consensual search. Joe Biden's search was prearranged, and they allowed Joe Biden's lawyers to be there. Merrick Garland now claims that the authorization to use deadly force is standard and was used to search Joe Biden's home as well. But for some reason, Merrick Garland has yet to produce the documents to prove this. It's hard to ignore the unfair double standard where Democrats are protected while Republicans are arrested and thrown in prison. Keep in mind that the whole time Merrick Garland has run the Department of Justice, his record is a series of hyper-political decisions and unfair tactics. We have seen multiple whistleblowers come forward claiming the Department of Justice is protecting the Bidens. We have seen unfair prosecutions over January 6 defendants. In fact, the Supreme Court is expecting to rule on some of these issues next month, which could overturn hundreds of charges from being too harsh. This is the Department of Justice that we have seen repeatedly attack Catholics and pro-life activists and put them in prison, while violent criminals are allowed out on the streets. This brings us to the audio recording. Congress has requested the audio from Joe Biden's interview with Robert Hur. Merrick Garland turned over a written transcript, but has refused to turn over the audio. This is really confusing. Since Joe Biden is not being charged, the investigation is over. If there's no investigation, there is no reason to hold the audio. If the written transcript is supposed to be the same thing as the audio, what would possibly be the problem with turning it over? Here is Merrick Garland explaining why he will not turn over the tapes.
We have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the committees get responses to their legitimate requests. But this is not one. To the contrary, this is one that would harm our ability in the future to successfully pursue sensitive investigations.
Merrick Garland is saying that he gets to decide what Congress needs to see. That's actually not correct. Congress has subpoena power to investigate potential corruption, which is why they are holding an impeachment inquiry of the president. You don't get to decide how you want to respond to a subpoena. You have to respond or you will be held in contempt and thrown in jail. Imagine if the police was investigating you for a crime and they asked you for evidence, but instead of turning over the evidence, you turned over a paraphrased version of the evidence and told the cops, "Just trust me, it's accurate." You would be thrown in jail so fast. For some reason, Merrick Garland wants to hide these tapes so badly that he's willing to go to prison to keep them from the public. What is on these tapes? Here is Representative Andy Biggs questioning Merrick Garland this week about the tapes.
So let's just face it, Mr. Biden has not been prosecuted, correct?
That's correct.
And the rationale given by Mr. Hur is because he was a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, and he thought the jury would have sympathy towards Mr. Biden.
That was one of a long list of reasons that Mr. Hur gave for his decision.
Give me one more reason.
He found that, look, I don't want to get into a discussion about this, but I will say one of them was that the president was completely cooperative in this matter.
That's the reason, huh? Okay, all right.
You asked me one of the reasons. That was one of the reasons.
The issue that we have here, you don't want to give us the audio tape. You don't want us to have the recording. But ultimately, the issue is whether the transcript actually supports the special counsel's determination.
I can only think of a couple of reasons Merrick Garland would hide the audio. What if the written transcript was altered and does not match the tapes? In fact, the Department of Justice has already admitted it does not match. In a separate lawsuit brought by Judicial Watch, the Heritage Foundation, and CNN, they are also suing to get the audio. In court filings, the Department of Justice admitted that the transcript was altered, but they claim that it is limited to removing ums and stutters. They claim that the alterations have no material difference. So there is a difference. It just matters to the degree of difference. Given Merrick Garland's history of bad faith, it seems reasonable that Congress should be allowed to decide if the differences are material. A second alternative is that the audio might reveal that Joe Biden's cognitive decline is worse than what is described in the written transcript. For example, let me just read you some of the transcript. Here Joe Biden is talking about his Corvette that was parked in the garage next to the classified documents. He says, "And the worst part was, they said I couldn't drive it outside the driveway. It's a long driveway. So I'd get it to the bottom of the driveway, tack it up to about $4,000, indiscernible, makes car sound, indiscernible, laughter." What is he talking about? He sounds like a crazy person. This is the President of the United States. I think we should all hear this audio to figure out what they're talking about. There are very real questions about whether Joe Biden has lost his mind. If he cannot sit through an interview, how is he running the country? I just don't understand why they are hiding these tapes. I would like to hear the tapes. Would you like to hear the tapes? Why can't we listen to the tapes? The bottom line is that Congress needs that audio, and Merrick Garland does not get to decide what Congress can ask for. What is even more strange is that Joe Biden has asserted executive privilege as a way to protect the tapes from being disclosed. He is claiming that the audio is private. This is insane. Executive privilege is supposed to protect the president's communications with his advisors, not an interview by law enforcement over a crime. What is really ironic is that Peter Navarro, the former advisor to President Trump, is currently in prison for his refusal to respond to a congressional subpoena, citing executive privilege. Just this week, Steve Bannon was also ordered to report to prison for the same crime as refusing to respond to Congress over executive privilege. I want to make sure you understand what is going on. Merrick Garland is prosecuting Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon and throwing them in jail over this same issue. But now he's claiming executive privilege protects this audio. Does that sound like a two-tiered system of justice? Because it does to me. This whole scandal comes down to trust. Merrick Garland is telling Congress, just trust me. Just trust that the changes in the transcript are minor. Given the fact that Joe Biden is incentivized to cover up his crimes, given the fact that the FBI has many examples of lying to the American people, given the fact that Merrick Garland's job record so far is full of examples of bad faith, Congress is right not to trust him, and they are still demanding the audio. To highlight why you might not want to trust Merrick Garland, let me explain his background, because I don't think a lot of people understand who he is. Merrick Garland was the former Assistant Attorney General for Bill Clinton. During this time, the Clintons were under investigation for the Whitewater scandal. The Whitewater scandal involved an investment the Clintons made in a housing development in Arkansas, which resulted in numerous crimes. 15 other people were convicted of crimes, but for some reason, not the Clintons. The scandal continued when Bill Clinton's aide, George Stephanopoulos, attempted to have the head of the investigation removed. Congress subpoenaed the Clintons' records related to Whitewater, and the Clintons claimed they did not have any records. But then the documents were found 2 years later in the personal residence of the Clintons with Hillary Clinton's fingerprints on them. You know, people talk about Hillary Clinton's emails, and she destroyed her emails after a congressional subpoena. Well, she's been doing this for a long time. Merrick Garland was working for the Clintons during the Whitewater scandal. Then Merrick Garland became a prosecutor for high-profile cases, including the explosion in Oklahoma City and the Unabomber. The explosion in Oklahoma City happened in 1995 while the Whitewater scandal was still being investigated, and potentially destroyed the documents related to the Whitewater investigation. What a strange coincidence. So Merrick Garland has spent his career working closely with the intelligence agencies. Then Obama announced in 2016 that he had selected Merrick Garland to be the next Supreme Court judge of the United States. Conservative Justice Antonin Scalia died on February 2016, Obama's last year in office. But the president cannot just choose whoever he wants. The Senate has to confirm his selection. Senate Republicans blocked Merrick Garland's nomination in the Senate, explaining that the next president should select the next Supreme Court justice. They held no hearings and no vote for almost a year before Merrick Garland's nomination expired. As we all know, Donald Trump was elected president in 2016, and he selected the next Supreme Court justice. Now, I want you to put yourself in Merrick Garland's shoes. He was announced to take a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land, only to sit and watch for a year as Republicans took that away. In my opinion, everything he is doing now, he sees through that perspective. Of course his actions are hyper-political. In my opinion, Merrick Garland is a small and petty man who is using his office to get revenge against Republicans. I think the evidence backs that up. Let me remind you of something that I think a lot of people have forgotten about. Do you remember E. Jean Carroll? She is the woman who accused Donald Trump of raping her. Even though there was no evidence and the jury found that there was no rape, the New York jury still awarded her $83 million. Merrick Garland single-handedly made that case possible. E. Jean Carroll's case is based off a tweet that Trump sent while he was president, where he said she was lying and not my type. E. Jean Carroll sued Trump in 2019, claiming defamation. The Department of Justice under Bill Barr stepped in and took over Trump's defense. This essentially ended E. Jean Carroll's lawsuit. It's against the law to sue the president. If it weren't that way, everyone who didn't like him would be constantly suing, and the president would never get anything done. But when Merrick Garland took over as the head of the Department of Justice, he reversed this decision and decided that the Department of Justice would no longer defend Trump against lawsuits brought by E. Jean Carroll. Merrick Garland decided that Trump's tweets were not performed under the duties of the job of president, and therefore E. Jean Carroll was free to sue him. If it were not for this decision by Merrick Garland, E. Jean Carroll would have received $0. This is just another decision in a string of decisions where Merrick Garland uses his office to attack Republicans. It is his form of revenge. A lot of people compare the current situation with the audio tapes to the Watergate scandal with Richard Nixon. President Nixon was being accused of abuse of power. He recorded an audio conversation of himself talking about a break-in at the Democrat National Committee. He discussed trying to obstruct the FBI investigation. Congress subpoenaed the audio recordings. Nixon refused and instead submitted a written transcript. But Congress wanted the tapes because a written transcript could be edited. The issue went to the Supreme Court that unanimously agreed that Nixon had no executive privilege over the tapes. The tapes were released and exposed that the transcript was, in fact, edited and showed that Nixon did abuse his power. How is the current situation with Merrick Garland any different? We have the transcripts. We know they are altered. We need the audio tapes. This week, Merrick Garland was asked about the comparison to Nixon.
You produced the transcripts to this committee, correct?
Yes.
And prior to producing the transcripts to the committee, they were leaked to the press. So based on Mitchell, which is still good law, the recordings are, in fact, no longer confidential, aren't they?
Can I respond? I'm sorry, that's not what Mitchell was about at all. Mitchell was, first of all, about transcripts created by President Nixon, for which there was plenty of reason to believe that they were not accurate. And secondly, it had to do with the confidentiality of communications between Nixon and his staff. And once he provided the transcripts, the court said those communications were no longer confidential. That is not the allegation. That is not what we're asserting here. Here we're asserting confidentiality over the audio, not confidentiality, but protection of the audio in a criminal investigation, an interview, not a staff meeting.
Out of all of Merrick Garland's lies, this is the most obvious. He contradicts himself, and he claims there is no connection to Nixon because the audio is not considered executive privilege. First, he was claiming he could not turn them over because they were covered under executive privilege. Now he's claiming he cannot turn them over because they are not considered executive privilege. Which one is it? Either it is executive privilege or it is not executive privilege. It cannot be both. If it is executive privilege, it is a Nixon-style cover-up. If it's not executive privilege, then Merrick Garland is guilty of contempt of Congress. In either case, Merrick Garland is committing a crime. As a reminder, during the Watergate scandal, the Attorney General, John Mitchell, was convicted of perjury and went to prison. All this is telling me one thing. There is something really sinister on those tapes, and I want to know what it is. In my opinion, after listening to Merrick Garland's testimony this week, there is no doubt in my mind that there is some crime going on. It's either contempt of Congress, perjury, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, conspiracy, and potentially others. I think Merrick Garland is guilty of something, and he belongs in jail. I hope that Congress continues to act so that the American people can get some accountability. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think that Merrick Garland has committed a crime? Let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. If you like these videos, consider supporting the channel by signing up for a monthly membership for $6 a month on my website, wolvesandfinance.com. I continue to struggle with my videos getting demonetized and shadow banned, so your support helps me to keep putting out these videos. I'm Zach from Wolves and Finance. Thank you for watching.